when we're talking about the U.S. stance, it's sort of ambiguous, right? So you don't recognize it as a state, but then you still support its security. How sustainable is this?
Well, it's of course been sustainable for quite a long time. After all, it's 50 years, if you can believe it, since Henry Kissinger's secret mission to Beijing, when he met with the then Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai and began the process of cutting a new deal between the United States and the People's Republic of China. And part of that deal was that the U.S. would no longer recognize Taiwan as an independent entity, would not support any moves towards independence, would essentially accept China's claim that there was one China, that Taiwan was part of it. And yet, in practice, the U.S. continued all the way to continue to support Taiwan's security, to sell it weapons. And interestingly, in recent years, that support for Taiwan has become somewhat more obvious, but it is still an ambiguous policy. And when Richard Haass of the Council on Foreign Relations last year argued for an end to ambiguity, i.e. the U.S. should explicitly support Taiwan in the way that it did back in the 1950s, nobody in Washington exactly jumped to agree with him. So I think this ambiguity has continued for a remarkably long time. But here's the thing that's changed. China is way, way more powerful, and its military capabilities are much greater than they were in previous crises over Taiwan, which means that the U.S. can't simply send a couple of aircraft carriers and say, hey, back off, in the way that it did as recently as in the 1990s. So that's the key. I think what's making the situation unsustainable is the growing strength of China and the clear resolve of Xi Jinping to end Taiwan's de facto autonomy when he is president, i.e. at some point within, let us say, maybe as little as 5 years.
What was really interesting this time around was the rhetoric. Despite this ambiguity and despite the growing presence of China, the rhetoric coming from the U.S., coercion, aggression, not only in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Xinjiang as well. Why make such public statements heading into negotiations?
It's fascinating. I mean, one of the things that not many people can have foreseen has been that the Biden administration is actually tougher on China issues than its predecessor, the Trump administration. Now, I think it's fascinating how much continuity there is. It's not like Biden has taken the tariffs off. It's not like the tech war has been canceled. All the things that really began with Donald Trump seem to be carrying on. But what strikes me is that the rhetoric, as you notice, particularly on human rights and democracy questions, touching even on issues that are very clearly unambiguously Chinese domestic matters like the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang, all of this has actually been ramped up by the new Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, and by his counterpart, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and indeed by Joe Biden himself. So we actually are in the strange situation, which I'm not sure many people foresaw, that a Democratic administration sounds even more hawkish on China issues than Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo did. I sense that this partly came about because last year, the Biden campaign took a decision that they could not be seen to be soft on China because it might actually play to their disadvantage domestically. Remember, U.S. sentiment has turned distinctly hostile towards the People's Republic of China, especially in the last year because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think this began as an electoral calculation, but they're kind of now forced to follow through. And of course, on the Chinese side, the rhetoric has got a great deal more strident in the last year. We've become used to wolf warrior diplomacy, and that wolf warrior diplomacy, I think, has not gone well for China. In fact, it's elicited a good deal of hostility from not only the United States, but from European countries too.
Neil, we've heard from at least two top Chinese generals calling for more military budget spending in China out of these concerns about a possible confrontation with the US. We know that a bigger military budget is probably not likely for the Biden administration this year, but in your opinion, do you think under President Biden and under this administration, we're actually maybe surprisingly closer to the risk of the Thucydides trap than we were under President Trump?
Well, the Thucydides trap, which is always hard to say on television, is an idea that my old friend at Harvard, Graham Allison, put forward in his book, Destined for War, the argument being that ever since ancient times, since the time of the ancient Greeks, when there's a rising power and an incumbent power, there's quite likely, though not certainly, going to be a showdown. And one can see this in the defense spending data already. Remember, China is increasing its defense budget significantly. The most recent increase is somewhere of the order of 6 or 7%. The US under Donald Trump increased its military spending. And so we have already an effective arms race going on because China's acquired the capability with land-based missiles to sink American aircraft carriers. If the US commitment to Taiwan is to be credible, then clearly it needs a significant increase in not only Taiwan's military capability, which is distinctly lacking relative to the mainland, but also in the US ability to project power. And let's not forget the other countries interested in this issue. From Japan's point of view, if Taiwan came under the control of the People's Republic, that would really pose a major challenge to Japan's security. And so the Japanese are interested in this. Indeed, in recent talks with the US Defense Secretary, this issue came up. So I do think from the point of view of the Thucydides trap, both China and the United States have taken quite a few steps closer to falling into that trap and ending up in a conflict over Taiwan. I think Taiwan has the potential to combine elements from the first Cold War of Cuba, of Berlin, of the Persian Gulf. You already alluded to Taiwan's incredible importance in the economics of semiconductor manufacturing. It's a prize from an economic point of view as well as a strategic point of view. So yeah, I think the danger is unquestionably rising. Wars often start because the two sides underestimate each other. And I think the US may be underestimating Xi Jinping's resolve on this issue, and Xi Jinping may also be underestimating Joe Biden's resolve.